Hi, my name's Kerry Brooks. I live in Placerville, California with my wife Jeannie. I was asked to give a brief, like 5 minutes, so I'm going to try to keep it real short if I can. A brief history of New Hope Community Church in Antioch, California. Back in the early 90s, we lived in Lafayette, California. Went to church in Moraga, to this real small church that was a great church, great people. But we were a little bit frustrated because over many years, the church just never grew, very much, and particularly didn't grow with new Christians coming in. There was about 75 people or so, and we had prayed a lot about that and tried a lot of different things to try to figure out, how to reach more people. 95% of the people in Moraga at the time were not believers and didn't go to church, and so we really prayed a lot about it, thought a lot about it, and I'm a mortgage broker, and at the time I did the loan for some people in Antioch, and normally didn't do that much business out in that area, but had a referral from some people out there, Jim and Kathy Heron, and I had done a loan for them in 4 years before, and they had called to see if I could refinance their house. I went out, in those days you went out and sat down at a kitchen table and filled out applications, and so I was at their home and did that. I noticed they had a Bible that looked like it was actually pretty worn, and I asked them about it, and it turned out that in between the time that I had financed their house when they bought it and this refinance, they had become Christians and were actively involved in a Bible study, and I told them I was a Christian, and we got to talk a lot about that. And they referred me to some other people in their Bible study, the Lanhams, Dale and Janet Lanham. At the time, rates were real low, and so a lot of people needed to refinance, and so I refinanced Lanham's house, got to sit down and talk to them a lot, and then they referred me to I think maybe I'm not even sure the next one, but probably it was the Burks, so I refinanced their house, and they referred me to other people, and I got to know a lot of people in Antioch just doing mortgages, for these people. They all were connected through a Bible study and also through a church in Antioch, and they were frustrated about some of the things that had changed at their church, and were trying to figure out what to do and just weren't sure of it. And I talked to them about the possibility of them starting a brand new church in Antioch. I had learned a little bit about kind of this new style of doing church that was more casual, with casual dress, with upbeat music, and just kind of a whole different way of doing church than a lot of churches were doing back in those days. And I really encourage the Lanhams particularly to seriously consider doing that. This is kind of a long story that I'll not give the details of, but basically we learned of a Saddleback training seminar that they did. It was a 5-day deal back in those days, and they'd done it for a couple of years, but they had great success. I remember seeing a brochure for them saying that 48% of the people coming in were, I'm sorry, there was 48% growth per year over an 11-year period. Saddleback was 11 years old at that time. They grew 48% a year average over 11 years, with 70% of the people being unchurched people. And so that really caught my eye, and I really wanted to go to this gathering that they had, this training about, or basically, kind of showing how they do things at Saddleback. We encouraged the Lanhams to come with us to go down there. We were really thinking seriously of maybe launching a new church in Lafayette with a style of contemporary style church. Lanhams couldn't make it, but they said, when you get back, let's get together and tell us what you learned. And so we went down. It was about a 5-day deal, and just learned all about, how they were doing things, and kind of the big reasons people don't go to church had nothing to do with theology, any of that kind of stuff. It really had to do with more practical things like clean restrooms and good nurseries and that sort of thing. So at the seminar, we kept bumping into Roger Dill, who was, at the time he was a pastor in Pleasant Hill at a Covenant church there called Hope Center, and we had actually visited there before, so I knew of him. I didn't know him. But we met, since we were both from the Bay Area, and this gathering is about 800 mostly pastors. There were a few of us that weren't pastors there. And we just kept bumping into them over and over again. And finally, one day that we bumped into him on an elevator, I mentioned to him that we were seriously considering launching a contemporary-style church in Lafayette, where we lived, and that also knew a bunch of people in Antioch that I was really encouraging maybe to start a church there as well. He really perked up when I mentioned Antioch, because they had been praying about potentially launching a new church in Pittsburgh, and so he really wanted to talk more about particularly Antioch area and potentially starting a church there. And so we agreed to get together after we got back home and talk more about that, and also talk about Lafayette, where I was primarily interested. We got back, and Lanham's had us over with some other people. Honestly, I can't even remember who it was, but a small group of people, and we kind of did dog and pony show to say, here's how this thing goes to a contemporary church. You have a band instead of an organ, and you have casual dress, and you have real practical messages, and this kind of thing, and really encouraged them to do that in Antioch, and kept kind of thinking about Lafayette ourselves. We also got together with Roger Dill, and he really encouraged us. Particularly, he was interested in Pittsburgh and Antioch area, and so he really encouraged us to think about that area, as well. We kept urging the Lanhams, to do that, along with the Burks. Mike at the time was on staff at the Methodist Church there, so he really felt that he couldn't do anything like that in Antioch, because it would be sort of like competition with his old church and stuff like that. So we also were talking to a lot of other people about churches and church planting and that kind of thing. And during this time, I had a conversation with a guy that was kind of an expert in church planting on the telephone, and he mentioned that if you have a core group of 60 people or more, when you start a new church, the odds of it succeeding go up about 300% compared to if you have less than 60 adults, when you start. So I hang up with a guy, and it's like, 15 minutes later, Janet Lanham called me and said, Kerry, we've been talking to some people, quite a few people, and we really think there's a pretty good core group of people that would be interested in doing this in Antioch. And I said, really? Well, that's really cool. About how many people do you think you might have? And she took a few minutes and calculated it up, and she said, I think it's about 50 or 25 couples is what she said. I don't remember. I think I said the guy had told me 50 adults was the magic number. And since I had just talked to him, it was just like, wow, this is just amazing, to hear this. And she said, we really would be really interested in doing it, but we will only do it if you'll come out and be the pastor. And I went, oh my gosh, Antioch, well, we'll think about it. And so Jeannie and I prayed more about it and decided, yeah, this sounds like something God's really putting together. And so we started kind of developing a plan for how we were going to do this. And we started these Friday night I don't even remember what we called them, but we got together and did some music, some contemporary music, sort of did this is kind of like what this thing would look like a little bit, if we start this church, and to just kind of get some momentum going with some people. And so we did it on Friday nights. I think we did it, I don't even remember now if it was every other Friday or every Friday night, but I still remember us packing up our van. Jeannie had a keyboard that she played, and I played guitar, and we went out to a home of one lady, and I can't remember who she is now either, but she had a large house, and so we started meeting there. Lisa Burke started coming there. Mike was still, he really felt he couldn't participate, in it. I had lunch with him. He came over to Walnut Creek, and we had lunch over there at Emil Villas. And I remember, talking to him and saying, why don't you be a part of this thing? And, you could, be on staff at this new church maybe or something, So, but at the time he said, well, I'll pray about it. But I just, it didn't, right now I think if I do anything, I would need to move out of Antioch to someplace else to minister. So, but Lisa was all in. Boy, she was cool coming to the gatherings, and there were just a bunch of people that started showing up at these things, and Fosters and just a number. I was trying to think the Jensens. A bunch of really, really good people that were a part of these gatherings that we had, and it kept kind of growing. And we had planned on launching, I think, on Easter in 1993, but it got bigger and bigger, and there were a lot of people that said, well, we're if you start, we'll come, but not until you start. And I think the last gathering we had was at the Jensens, and it was just packed the gills. There were people, on the second floor balcony looking down and stuff, and it was like, okay, I guess we'll launch this thing. And so we ended up going over to a school. Let's see, Jack London, I believe it is. School and started in January of 1993, and I'm kind of a numbers guy because of being in the mortgage stuff and all, and I had done a whole spreadsheet with a plan of how many people we wanted in class 101 and 201 and 301 and kind of this whole thing, plugging out for like 5 years. And we also talked to the Bigleys, Tom and Christine Bigley, they were doing youth at our church in Moraga, and encouraged them to come over and join us and help with this thing. But when we first started, it was just us, so it was real small. But our first gathering was like a little over 100 people, I think. So we were really excited about that, because that was actually bigger than our church in Moraga already. Kind of amazing. And we did a lot of advertising things for the first Easter. The first Easter, in my spreadsheet, I planned on us having 225 people. That was our goal. It seemed like a huge goal. And we had 223, I remember, at that gathering. And so we were really excited, and things really, took off rapidly. And within a month or two, Mike Burke finally decided, that God was leading him to do this, and so he came over and came on staff. And then Tom Bigley did the same thing, and we started with a kind of a pastoral team concept with Dale Lanham, myself, Mike, and Tom. And the three of us, Tom, Mike, and I, would rotate each week, preaching. And it was just one of the most exciting times of my life, with just tons of people that had never been to church coming. And we had some big mistakes that we made, but boy, God was just so gracious and bringing a lot of people in. The second Easter, I had projected that we would have 525, and I think one of the theories that we had was that what we had at Easter, it would slow down in summer, but then by the end of the year, by Christmas, we would have about the same amount in attendance that we had that Easter. And sure enough, that first year, I think that was about right. That it was around 200 and some odd people showing up on Sundays. The second Easter, we shot for 525, and we had like 528. It was just amazing, how just God was really gracious with my stupidity with all these numbers, and it was just a fabulous time with tons and tons of people becoming Christians, and just I can give you a million stories of just amazing things that happened, during that time. I remember that there was one. We got a call from somebody that there was a lady that was terminally ill with cancer and had 3 boys. Excuse me. And this church had been bringing food over to this lady, but they had decided that they were going to quit doing it. We weren't clear about the reason. I mean, they had said because she wasn't a member or something, but that didn't quite make sense. But it became real obvious the reason when we started bringing food, because she was the most hateful person you've ever wanted. You would think she'd be thankful with people bringing food, but she would be really nasty to people, and so it was really a test of faith, to even bring food to this lady. But we had faithful people that kept doing it, and she had a sister that was a bartender over in Danville that was, would come over and try to help with the boys and stuff when she could, and she was really interested in these Christians that were doing this, and particularly because she knew her sister was pretty tough to get along with. Her sister was pretty bitter and not very happy about dying of cancer and stuff like that. So eventually the sister brought the boys. We had a big thing that we did for kids, and she brought them to that. We called it TGIF. And she ended up coming to church, ended up becoming a Christian, and eventually, this kind of an amazing thing. Eventually, brought her sister to church, and I think it may have been the first time her sister had been there. And her sister, before she died, also accepted Christ. So just a ton of stories like that. I remember taking a walk with Jeannie after we'd been going for a couple of years, and saying, if we died right now, life would be worth it. This was an amazing ride. So, excuse me for getting emotional. But it was a great time, great memories of New Hope Community Church. Hope this helps. Bye-bye.